There's not a lot you need to know about the first piece in this programme. Strauss's Don Juan is very much a young man's work, and it's about the great legendary seducer. So, as you can imagine, it's full of a young man's feelings and aspirations and dreams. Apparently, on one occasion, he told the orchestra he was conducting, just play this as though you were about to be married, but not married yet, and I think you'll get the feeling. I will say one thing about it, though, and that is that the ending is a little bit strange. It's full of brilliant ardour and absolutely gorgeous depictions of longing and, of course, erotic fulfillment. But the end is very quiet, strange, fragmentary, and minor key. And that's because Strauss was working from a poem which inspired him very much when he was writing it. And the poem tells us what happens when Don Juan, having fulfilled his desires repeatedly, realizes how empty his quest is and how empty he is himself. And that's an extraordinary moment of realization. And Strauss depicts that very tellingly at the end of this piece. So if you're a bit mystified at first as to why, after having beautifully described this romantic vision of a young man's erotic quest, it suddenly seems to peter out strangely at the end. That's why disillusionment, emptiness, Strauss seems to tell us, lie behind Don Juan's constant striving for fulfillment. Now, obviously, I can't tell you very much about Anders Hillborg's Viola Concerto because this is its world premiere, and I haven't heard it yet, just like you. But don't worry, Anders Hillborg is definitely not one of those composers who likes, as some people put it, to challenge. Well, he does like to challenge in a sense, but in an exciting and invigorating way. This is music that absolutely communicates very directly. It's full of energy. It's also full of expression. There's a lot of emotion in his music and long singing lines. It's the kind of music that can really carry you forward with it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do with the viola concerto. The viola is an instrument that used to be regarded as the Cinderella of the string section, and you probably know that an awful lot of jokes are made about violas in orchestras, some of them not very kind, like, how can you tell when a viola's playing out of tune? The bow's moving. That sort of thing. But since the 20th century, and great viola players like Cecil Aronowitz in this country or Paul Hindemith in Germany, people have begun to realise that the viola has a soul of its own, which can be explored in beautiful music. William Walton's Viola Concerto, for instance, is an absolute masterpiece in this genre, and you can't imagine it played by any other member of the string orchestra. That kind of slightly more introverted quality that the viola has, that's a beautiful quality too. It's less out there than the cello, and certainly than the violin, but that too has its own particular kind of poetry, and I'm fairly sure that Anders Hillborg knows how to exploit that to the full. There'll also be some pretty exciting and challenging virtuosic writing too. But one thing you can trust with Anders Hillborg's music is you don't need to know anything about it to be captivated by it. That's one of the best things about it, I think. There's no need to read a long analytical program note or to have some idea in your back of your mind, just to kind of let go and let this music carry you forward. Because, like a lot of Scandinavian composers, Anders Hillborg has a very strong sense of natural processes in his music. And that, I think, is one of the things that can make this music so appealing, that we feel that there are basic life processes going on in it. And once you've tuned into those, which I think you can do very simply, then the music, in a way, explains itself. Anyway, I'm excited about this piece too, so I hope you enjoy it. The Swedish composer Dag Wíren is one of those composers who really had no patience with the idea of writing difficult music that people found challenging. I want to write modern music that people enjoy, he said on one occasion. And if I tell you that he actually wrote one of Sweden's entries for the Eurovision Song Contest, you'll get the idea. This is not a composer who's going to cause you any serious challenges. But the Serenade for Strings is an absolute delight. It really is. It's full of memorable tunes. I guarantee that they'll be nagging in your head, some of these, when this piece is over. It's absolutely delightful, and it has a freshness, a quality like the Swedish fresh air that you associate with those far northern latitudes. And it's just marvellous string writing as well. This is a composer who really understands what a string orchestra can do in the way that some of the greatest English composers could. It's a treat. It's not a deep, serious, probing work, but it's a very lovable one. And I do hope you enjoy it. But after that comes, well, what I'd say is one of the greatest things to come out of the Nordic countries, and that's saying a fair bit. Sibelius's Fifth Symphony. The whole thing was born around about 1915, an amazing experience Sibelius had when he was standing outside his villa in mid-Finland. Apparently he was looking out towards the lake, and this is what he writes in his diaries. Today at 10 to 11 I saw 16 swans. One of my greatest experiences. Lord God, what beauty! They circled over me for a long time, then disappeared into the solar haze like a gleaming silver ribbon. Almost immediately, a figure came to his mind, a figure which was partly associated with the call of the swans, but also with the movement, the slow, majestic movement of their wings. It sounds like this, and we hear it on the horns. On top of that is a theme which he was inspired to. Actually, the actual cry of the swan found its way into the woodwind theme on the top. You put those two together and you get one of the loveliest things, I think, in all symphonic music. It's a visionary moment. But having had that vision, it then took Sibelius another 4 years of very hard work to arrive at the whole finished symphony. Now, this may be surprising for you because I remember, as a Danish composer friend of mine put it once, that we were both enthusing about this symphony, and he said, it's amazing the kind of the organic logic of that symphony. It's like watching a speeded up film of a plant growing from a seed into the full flower. I knew exactly what he meant. But if you look at Sibelius's sketchbooks, my goodness me, he really gave himself a hard time over it. And there were times when he got into real crises. Crises he would only get through by his tried and tested resort, which was very large quantities of whiskey. In fact, sometimes it seems that was the only way Sibelius could shut up the critic in his own head that was constantly telling him that what he was writing wasn't any good. I find that amazing, because this is certainly one of my desert island symphonies, or desert island pieces, I think. But just to talk about that sense of organic logic, I'll take you right to the beginning of the symphony. It begins with a wonderful horn call like this. That theme is almost like a kind of, that's the seed from which everything in this symphony, everything in some way or other grows. That is itself very fertile. The woodwind answer like this. And then that grows just a little bit more. And then it begins to put out tendrils. And it's like just watching something grow and sprout in the soil and begin to put its leaves and its tendrils out above the surface of the earth. It's absolutely wonderful. And that process goes on all the way through the symphony. In another passage, Sibelius, in his diaries, Sibelius said, I think that writing a symphony is rather like creating a river. You're just carried along by the current. And that is the effect, I think, when you hear this symphony, that somehow or other from that horn call through to that, you can hear a process of growth in which absolutely everything is, as it were, related to or derives from the DNA, the musical DNA in that theme at the beginning. But if that all sounds a bit abstract, it's also a symphony that's full of glorious evocations of nature, and very much northern nature. I don't know, I've been to Finland several times and I love the country, and for me, I can hear the very particular sound of wind in pine trees, in conifers in parts of this symphony. You can even seem to smell the damp earth. And when you talk about rivers, they're big northern rivers. There's no doubt about it, with very strong currents and very clear, beautiful water. It's a symphony that you can just go back to again and again. I've known it for about 45 years, and I'm amazed at the stuff that I keep finding in it. Every time I come back and look at the score again, there's something new to discover, some new subtlety or some new vista or perspective. It's that kind of piece. At the end, the swan hymn, as Sibelius called it, that wonderful horn theme, emerges triumphant. But it's also quite a journey to get there. There's nothing easy about the triumph at the end of this symphony. And finally, what we hear is a series of sharp chords on the full orchestra with long silences in between them. It's like kind of waiting for a moment. Everything's filled with expectation. And then finally, the symphony is rounded off. Blum, blum, very quickly. Finns don't like long farewells, I've noticed this, and Sibelius is no exception. But just for a minute, we seem poised on the edge of something. Wow, what is it? And you can feel even that has grown from that remarkable seed moment that I played right at the beginning of the symphony. So whether you're hearing this for the first time or the 100th time, I think you're in